So the X-Man Shadow V2M comes in at £32, which is quite expensive for a 6x6. Similar price to the Aoshi GTSM and the original X-Man Shadow. So basically it had better be good. So it's a lot lighter than the previous Shadow and the MGC, and at just 159.5 grams, which is significantly lighter than the MGC and even more lighter than the original Shadow. It's also a millimetre smaller than most 6x6s, at just 64 millimeters, whereas the Shadow and the original Shadow and the MGC are both 65. And it has very nice turning if you're accurate at turning. Nominally, so just one layer corner cutting is pretty good, basically as good as the MGC, without much issue with that. However, when you try and do 2-layer corner cutting, I think this is one of the issues with it. It can very easily end up in a situation like that and cause some sort of catching. Whereas with the MGC, if you do that, it just won't let you do it, so it just snaps right back into place. Whereas with the Shadow, it can lead to some lockups on the other side as well, which if you heard that sound there, that's a bit of catching. And that, I think, is one of the problems with it. So personally, I haven't been able to get times quite as good as the MGC, unfortunately. It's not far off in performance, it's very close, and I definitely think that some speed cubers will really like the Shadow V2 and will prefer it over the MGC. Unfortunately, I can't say that's the case for me. If you like the original Shadow a lot, then get this right away. No questions asked. It's much better than the original Shadow. And obviously, we really shouldn't be comparing it to Shadow. Nobody likes the Shadow anyway. Shadow's just rubbish, isn't it? So I was not expecting that. It turns out the designs are rather similar enough that you can fit pieces in and it still performs. Not well, but it still performs as a speed cube. So that's rather surprising. I did not expect that. So these 3 pieces here are from the Shadow V2 and the rest are from the Shadow. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't perform well, and there's a lot of weird catching, but it does work. But anyway, I'll get onto the actual pieces to show them what's changed. So, a lot of the design is pretty similar between the Shadow and the Shadow V2M. The main difference, to be honest, is probably just the plastic. I think they've chosen a smoother plastic with less friction for the Shadow V2M, which does help a fair amount. As you can see here, the corner design is broadly similar but has a much smaller thing over here at the end. And the main difference between these edge pieces is actually just the number of lines on there here, and that helps to reduce friction between the pieces, I believe. Other than that, it's basically the same. So you can see here, it's practically the exact same, except for that. There is quite a reasonable difference in the shape of these if you look very closely, and I don't really know what that does, but it probably does something. Same with this. There's these lines here for friction, slightly different shape. So actually they haven't changed anywhere near as much as I thought they would do, but obviously it is a different puzzle, and they've certainly made some improvements on it, just not as much as I would have hoped for charging £32 for a new 6x6. So I'm glad that QiYi have finally come out with a 6x6 to challenge its original Shadow, because obviously it's been the original Shadow's been beaten to all intents and purposes, even in my opinion, by the likes of the QiYi V2M and probably even the Yushin Little Magic 6x6. So I'm glad that they've finally released an update. Unfortunately, it's not as good as I was hoping, but it's still quite nice, and I think some good speed cubers will be switching to it. How many, I'm not sure. Obviously, with all 6x6s, you do need to make sure that they're well lubricated. Otherwise, they just get slow, and it's horrible. And you really don't want a slow 6x6. I do expect a better 6x6 than the MGC to come out in 2021, and obviously in that cube release video I predicted the Aoshi WRM. It hasn't come out yet. I still think it will come out next year, but it had better be good. I do think the WRM line has the capability of producing a really good 6x6 and 7x7, but obviously they haven't done it yet. I hope that's just because they really want to make it good, because obviously they should. It's about time too. So yeah, I think there'll be lots of interesting cubes coming out next year, which will challenge all these popular cubes at the moment, but it remains to be seen. Obviously it's becoming harder to make improved cube design now, so who knows.
Now, I suspect that QiYi are probably very annoyed that, well, I'm not sure about annoyed, but quite, well, they're definitely, I suspect, going to try and make a better 6x6 than the MGC 6x6 quite quickly, and they're probably going to get to work on it as soon as they're back from holiday, I reckon, because they probably don't want a 6x6 to be better than theirs.